Hello, everyone. Here is my disclaimer. The views of the guests discussed in this interview may not represent those of the station or the host. I am Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. Folks, I have phenomenal guests on my show. Today is exceptionally phenomenal. I am so honored, so grateful to be talking to this great man of part of history. My first sports interview, my son was very impressed that I was talking to someone from the sporting arena, which I haven't done before. And my guest today is the great Mr. Ray Scott, author of The NBA in Black and White, the memoir of a trailblazing NBA player and coach, which is written by Ray Scott with CHARLEY Rosen, introduction by EARL the Pearl MONROE. Ray Scott was a phenomenal basketball player, played on several teams, Detroit Pistons, Baltimore Bullets, Virginia Squires. He was head coach of the Detroit Pistons. He was named NBA Coach of the Year in 1974, the first African-American to win the coveted award. And Mr. Ray Scott was also a men's basketball head coach at Eastern Michigan University. I want to welcome Mr. Ray Scott to Chatting with Betsy. I am so honored. Thank you, Ray, for coming on.
Well, Betsy, the honor is mine, and thank you for such an elaborate introduction. Boy, I might ask you to go out with me on the road and just introduce me.
That would be cool.
Cool.
That would be cool. You're welcome. My pleasure. My son was. He was very impressed. I said, Josh, you have to read this book. And as I was telling you before we started to record, and I'm not, into sports myself, although I do know some of the names in your book, like Wilt Chamberlain, yes, and some of the older ones, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. This is funny. I remember Wilt Chamberlain and Abdul Kareem Jabbar mostly from the Dean Martin roast than I do basketball, because I don't watch basketball. But I'm going to ask you what I ask all my authors, and that is, what motivated you to write this wonderful, eye-opening book, which I have to tell my audience, everyone should be reading this book. Everyone, whether you're a sports fanatic or not. You need to read this book about American history. Go ahead, Mr. Ray Scott.
Yes. Oh, my. Okay, we're going to stay with the Mr. now. I am Ray Scott.
And I'll drop it.
We are fast friends, believe me. But what really motivated me to write the book was that lovely lady you spoke to earlier today, my Jennifer. Because I had spoken with her about so many of these things over the 40-plus years we've been married, and she said, "There's a book in there," and so I kind of believed it, but I didn't think that anyone really knew about me. I wasn't a household name. I mean, I played with Dr. J, and I played with Dave DeBusschere. I mean, great players, but that became household names. Earl of Pearl Monroe, another household name. Wes Unseld, household name. But I was a player, and I just had these wonderful experiences. I thought I had a good career, and people have said so. But I listened to Jennifer, and she and my friend, CHARLEY Rosen, got together and said, Ray's got a book in him, and we're going to get that book out of him. And so I agreed with them, and the pandemic, as horrific as it was my time to sit down, that 2-year period, and write a book. And so when I peered into my soul and looked, I said, what do I really want to say? The beginning point for me was 1960, because that was the advent of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And so when I thought about that, and that was my first vote, 1960, when I thought about John Fitzgerald Kennedy, I thought about the things that he said as president, and he called for equality in America. And as you know, anyone that has any historical background knows that at that time in 1960, it was coming into a tumultuous time, because we were coming into civil rights, we were coming into voting rights, and we were coming into a Vietnam War. So I thought all of those things were very interesting for a kid that was being drafted into the NBA at 22 years old, and was living all of this. I lived all of that tumult. And then I thought back to what is my motivation? And my motivation was from 1955, and that was the year that Emmett Till was murdered. And so Emmett Till's murder said to me, a 16-year-old in high school, it said to me, you should live in fear at 16, because Emmett Till was 14. And if this could happen to Emmett Till, could this happen to me? So that was my nightmare that I brought into the 1960s. And beginning with John Fitzgerald Kennedy and his call for the Negro population to become part of the advent and move forward in America, I thought it was exciting. Now, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, of course, was assassinated, but LBJ, his successor, Lyndon Baines Johnson, his successor as vice president, did bring those things into law, where we were being included in the American topography. And so we, as a people, have always looked back to John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who started the train, but Lyndon Baines Johnson put in the two laws and sadly got caught up in the Vietnam War. But I lived that period in the 60s and the 70s. I say the 60s, but the 70s, that it was more 20-year period. Those periods, like we talk about the Roaring 20s, when it really includes the 20s and the 30s. Well, we have the same thing, I think, in the 60s. And I think those two periods in our history, 250-year history, are two of our greatest periods because they signaled change.
Yes. I'm 64. I'll be 65 in December. And I remember vaguely, JFK being assassinated, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King being assassinated. And at that time in history in school, I was not taught about civil rights, maybe because it was, in the throes of going on. And I remember, don't ask me what I did 2 weeks ago, Ray, but I remember when Martin Luther King was assassinated, because my program, I might have been watching, I Dream a Genie or something like that, and I yelled to my mom, Dr. Martin Luther King was killed. They cut into my program. I didn't know who Martin Luther King was at that time. Had no clue. I was 9 or 10. And I had no clue. And then, of course, I learned, with the news, coming on. And you met Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yes, I did. I did.
You were front and center in history. Can you share with the audience what that was like to shake Dr. Martin Luther King's hand?
Oh, my. That is an incredible story because it occurred right there in Newark, New Jersey. And,
I'm in New Jersey.
Yeah, it occurred at the Newark airport. We were flying in to play a game against the New York Knickerbockers, and I was just a rookie. It was my first year in the NBA. And so, like a young kid in a new league, and you're getting paid, there's this glamour of the life that you go from, riding buses in Philadelphia to riding airplanes throughout the country. And so we fly this airplane, and we get into the airport, and there's all these 6'9", 6'10" guys walking around the terminal, and so we're walking through the terminal to go to our bus and get on a bus and go into the city and play the game, etc. And I'm walking down the runway with my friend and mentor, Earl Francis Lloyd. And Earl Lloyd was actually the first African-American to ever play in the NBA. He became a head scout. He became a assistant coach, and he brought me to Detroit, he and Dickie McGuire. And so when I came to Detroit, you meet all of these people. I mean, I met so many people in addition to Dr. King, including Muhammad Ali and Aretha Franklin, etc. But with Dr. King, the overriding thing I remember is that I was just walking down the terminal with Earl, and I was just bantering with my assistant coach because at that time, he was my friend because I was a new guy on the team. And so I just happened to be walking with him. And coming towards us was this group of gentlemen, Natalie attired, suits and ties, shoes highly polished, good-looking men, and they're coming towards us in a body. And Earl stops, and the head of the group stops. And Earl Lloyd said, I'll never forget this, he said, "Doc, how you doing, man?" And I said to myself, that's Dr. King. Earl just referred to Dr. King as Doc, And he said, they said, how you doing? And, they exchanged pleasantries. And he said, I want to introduce you to my man. He's our number one draft pick. And Dr. King said, oh, man, you're a big dude. And I was 6'9", and in shape, and so he said, "Man, you're a big dude." And he said, "So how you doing?" "Oh, I'm fine, Doc," and everything. And I remember we shook hands. And Betsy, when we shook hands, the power I felt in that man's hand, you would not believe, because I'm 6'9". This man is like 5'10", 5'11", maybe 180 pounds. So he's not a big man, but the power in his handshake, the power of his hand, I remember to this day. And so when people ask me what was the overwhelming feature, I mean, I'm sure we were talking, but that handshake, to this day, I've never forgotten it.
Wow, that's some powerful energy that Dr. King had.
Yes.
Definitely powerful energy. You could, hear it when he spoke.
Yes.
You could feel it, and you could just sense it.
Yes.
Ray, I want to put it in perspective for the young people out there who don't understand, maybe they're not taught racism and how it was in the 50s and 60s. Now, here you were traveling with different basketball teams, and you had to be careful, especially driving down south, traveling if you were traveling by bus then, where you stopped, where you ate. It's unconscionable when you think about it. Water faucets, whites only, I would say colors only. Can't sit at a lunch counter, sitting at the back of the bus. I know these things. But for the younger generation, I taught my son, but even younger than him, my son's 38, they may not know what it was like for you to have to actually plan out, like in detail, where you could stay, where you could eat.
Right.
That's like mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is mind-boggling that you could take someone another human being and treat them in that manner. But Betsy, if I may, because I would like to give you, and I do, it is in the book, but the initiation into that lifestyle, I was not a teenager, and I was not in my 20s. I was 12 years old. I went to Washington, D.C. with my uncle at 12 years old. And we, in those days, in the African-American community, we had a book called the Green Book. And the Green Book taught us how to travel. Now, my uncle had this book in the car. My uncle was a Methodist bishop in the church. And he was taking us down on a promised trip to Washington, D.C., my brother and I, because my mother, at 8 years old, my father died. So he had promised he was going to bring us to Washington, D.C. And we looked forward to that trip, and it came on a Christmas day or Christmas week in 1950. So in Christmas of 1950, my baby brother and I were in Washington, D.C., and what a revelation it was. Because I want the young people out there to understand, when I pulled into Washington, D.C. with my uncle, I was pulling into what they call kindly Jim Crow or segregation. We were not integrated in 1950. And so in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, I saw for the first time in my life, colored drinking fountains, they use the term colored bathrooms, colored allowed around back. I went to a movie with the kids in the area that I was living, and we were not allowed to sit on the main floor. We had to sit in the balcony. And I'm 12 years old. This is all a shock to me. So now on the return trip home, my antenna is up. I'm looking for all of these things. Well, excuse me, as being young kids, one of the things that happen when you get in the car, and you know the sound of it with your son, I got to go to the bathroom.
Yes.
So I got to go to the bathroom. So Uncle Reese says, well, you can't go. We'll have to go in the bushes. And be careful, because we don't want to be arrested for that. In the next one, I'm hungry. Well, if we get a hamburger at this place, we'll have to go around to the back and order it from the back and eat it in the car. And so all of those lessons were taught to me on a trip to the nation's capital. That's where segregation, or Jim Crow, that's where it was taught to me in Washington, D.C., at 12 years of age.
That is just awful. Racism and bigotry is not pleasant, folks. Whether it's, hidden or out in the open. I mean, when your, skin color is different, people obviously see that. I had racism where I'm Jewish, so when people find out that I'm Jewish, I could see them do a complete 180.
Yeah.
And it's, being called names, having your house graffitied. It's scary. It's humiliating. It's degrading. And I feel for anyone who gets discriminated against, because I know what it's like. And it cracked me up in your book. I had a laugh thinking of Wilt Chamberlain as bellhop up in the Borscht. I laughed so hard when I read that. Yeah. And you too.
We had an Emmy award-winning movie. It's still on, probably on 30/30 on ESPN, and it's the story of Wilt being at bellhop and how Wilt would hand the luggage into the second floor windows at Kutcher's Country Club. And so
that is so funny.
Wonderful piece. It's such a great piece. It's called the Borscht Belt Bell Hunt, and it's on Wilt Chamberlain. And and just for people that don't know this, I had not believed, because I had played against Wilt from the time I was 14. So when I was an adult, 19, 20, 21, 22, Wilt was that guy. Wilt was the man in basketball. And I remember we were up at Cutch's Country Club, and he had brought up his new friend and ingenue by the name of Kareem. His name was Louis Alcindor, and he hadn't changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar yet. And we were standing on the steps, and I was standing there, and I looked up and I said, Wilt, you do understand that this is the first time I have seen anyone taller than you. And Kareem was just a little taller than Wilt, and he was only 16 years old. And he was
wow.
He was I think one was 7'1", Wilt was 7'1", and Kareem was like 7'2", 7'2.5". But he was just, and I couldn't, as I looked up, I couldn't, because all my life, from the time, my basketball life, from the time I found out about Wilt Chamberlain, he was like the biggest human being I ever saw or ever played against. And so when people say, well, you were 6'9", and you played in high school, and I said, yeah, I was 6'8". I was 16 years old. I played against Wilt Chamberlain. He was 6'11", 7 feet, and he was 18 years old. And I said, what I have grounded in me for the rest of my life, because I started playing basketball against Wilt Chamberlain, is humility.
Your book is phenomenal, and I love the pictures in the book. Folks, you have to get this book, really, and read it and look at the pictures. It's phenomenal. And I have to ask you this, Ray. What was it like for you to receive that award, the NBA Coach of the Year in 1974, being the first African-American to receive that?
I received it in silence. I never uttered a word. And because I was so stunned at the size of this trophy, number one. Number two, we were in Cobo Hall, a city that I had come to in 1961 that had no idea who Ray Scott was. Remember, the NBA at that time was based on drafting All-Americans from college. And I was not an All-American from college. I had dropped out of college and played in the Eastern League on the East Coast and then been drafted into the NBA, so no one knew who I was. I didn't get any publicity around the country or anything, and I was not an All-American. And so when I came to Detroit, no one knew who I was. Well, here's this guy that no one knew in 1961. It's 1972, and he's 1974, actually, and this guy is receiving a prestigious award, the NBA Coach of the Year. And I stood there and I just thought, how did I ever get here? That's what was on my mind. And I was thinking of all the people that put so much into me and directed me and loved me. Oh man, I said, and here I am in the middle of Cobo Hall, in front of 11,000 people, being cheered before an NBA game. I think they know me now.
Wow, that is so awesome. And what it took, for you to get there, because if I remember correctly, and in reading your book, you were passed over for some trades. I don't know if they called the trades back then.
Yes, that's what they call them, yes.
Yeah, I told you I'm not sports savvy.
Yeah, you're doing good. Yeah, you got terminology. Yes, you're doing good. Yes.
And you're passed over, and passed over for promotion because of the color of your skin. And and there was, I didn't know this until reading your book, that there was a lot of Jewish basketball players at the time that
actually was the beginning.
Started.
My first chapter in the book, I can share this with you. My first chapter in the book was on the Jewish community, because the Jewish community had a big start in playing what they call organized basketball. I'm from Philadelphia, and the Philadelphia had the famous Philadelphia Spas. They had the famous House of David, and they had these. And these were gentlemen that all had beards, David liked beards and so forth. So I had a nodding acquaintance with the origination of basketball, and also with the great Abe Saperstein that started the Harlem Globetrotters. So, yes, I did my homework. I went back and researched. Charlie and I, that was the thing. We just dug up so many facts about basketball. So when you speak of the Jewish community with respect to sports, they were at the advent. The community itself was at the advent of so many things to entertain our masses. And they were very good at it, very good at figuring out and putting things together. I just, when you say that, there's so many people that touch my heart, because there's so many people with the unfair things that happen. There are people that were fair. And so I can't think about people that treated me unfairly without thinking and loving on those people who treated me fairly. And a lot of them were of the Jewish faith in terms of business.
That's really cool. I don't know if you know this. I didn't know this until I had heard about it with Louis Armstrong. Mm-hmm. He was a Jewish family took him in. Yes. I think his mother worked for them, and gave him his lessons. And I didn't even know that he knew how to speak Yiddish and wore a Jewish star. I had no idea.
It's in my book. I knew the Motzi. He knew the Motzi.
Yeah.
But he was far ahead of me, because he celebrated the high holidays. And I read the same thing you did, that one, and it was a revelation to me. Yes, I read that. Yeah,
my father loved Louis Armstrong. I wish I knew that when my father was alive, because then we could have discussed that. But I remember my dad, he loved the big bands. He was from that time, and Louis Armstrong was one of his favorites. And in your book, you had the story about the voting, there was a movie about that, which my mind just went blank about the name of the movie.
Selma?
Where the 3 people were killed for assisting.
Turner and Cheney, yes. Mississippi Burning.
Yes. That's it. It's in my mind. Yes.
Right. I got your back.
Yes. Thank you. I didn't.
Those 2 kids, and I just want to get this out, because, again, it's important to me. Those 2 kids, and the 3 of them were murdered. James Cheney was from Mississippi. But the 2 white kids that were murdered were from New York. So they sacrificed their lives to go south for voter registration. Andrew Goodman and Schwerner, and Mickey Goodwin and Andrew Schwerner, I think. Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney. I never forget those kids, because I have them right in line with a lady you may have heard of from Detroit who was killed while taking people to register to vote, and her name was Viola Liuzzo, an Italian lady from Detroit.
Wow.
And she was murdered. See, that time was unbelievable, because we talk about Dr. King and we talk about John Fitzgerald Kennedy, but we forget Bobby Kennedy. We forget Malcolm X. We forget Medgar Evers. There were so many people murdered in that time period between 60 and 70 with extermination or assassination or whatever they wanted to call it. And so it was an unusual time, and America was frayed But to begin to build and come back so strong in the 70s was incredible. But I had a ringside seat because I was blessed to be an NBA player and have these observations while not being poor and underprivileged and all of that. I didn't write my book from that perspective because I was an NBA player. God blessed me and let me become an NBA player, and I'm thankful for that. But I also have to look at what I saw and give a perspective of what I saw and what I heard in our country.
Yes, and I'm glad you did, because it is a very eye-opening. I saw that movie, Mississippi Burning, and I didn't know about that until I saw the movie. I heard of Rosa Parks. I heard of the little girls who were killed in the church bombing.
Yes.
And, it's very heartbreaking. I do remember watching the news of when African Americans were allowed, I think it was a college campus, and they had the National Guard there to allow them, or maybe it was a high school down south. And, you just, like when you grow up like a young person in today's world, they don't know about that. They haven't, witnessed that. And to, witness it it's quite traumatizing, to be afraid to walk down the street because of the color of your skin or your religion or any ethnic minority that a person may be. And I like to use my show, Ray, as a megaphone to help change the world, because we have to stop. We have to stop this hatred and the stigmas and the judgments that go on. And there's so much more, folks, in Ray Scott's book that I can't even get into in this interview, which is why you need to buy Ray Scott's book. Where can people buy your book, Ray?
Easy, right on Amazon. Amazon will have it. I've seen promotions that they've had where you order it today, you have it the next day. And
that's great.
You can get it in any bookstore, but you might have to order it depending on your store. But the bookstore that the book was in was Barnes & Noble. That was my number one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Barnes & Noble people did have it, but I just hope people read it, because what I want to share with them is the sense of history. So just like you say, it's just, for the people that already know it, it's just an affirmation of how I lived in it. So you know the history, but here's how I existed in the history. And for the people that don't know, and for the young people, here, let me lay this out for you. Let me put my arm around your shoulder and tell you how it really was and what we went through. And you think, not me. I'm not giving you answers. I'm giving you the opportunity to ask questions.
Yes, you have. And I'm so glad that my son, he loved your book. And he read it, and he's, my son's very sensitive to people being mistreated. And I beforehand, I have to say, I loved in your book how you wrote, I'm not going to live in Detroit. I wouldn't want to live in Detroit. And God laughed. And you ended up in Detroit, because isn't that how that works? There's actually a proverb, a Yiddish proverb. If you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans.
Tell him your plans.
and
I did.
yeah, that was funny. And I liked the story of how you met your wife, Jennifer.
Yeah.
And you're an interracial couple. Jennifer is white, which was not popular at that time, folks. Let me tell you, it was not popular at that time. And I think that it was just wonderful. I had to tell a quick story. When I was 16, this is back in 1974, 75, when I was 17, I worked in a nursing home. And there was a coworker, his name was Teddy, an African-American, and we used to talk down in the dining room, and I liked him, and he liked me. And we exchanged numbers. Well, there was this, people are going to get insulted, what you would call a hillbilly from the hills of West Virginia.
Okay.
Did not take too kindly to me talking to this fellow. Told me not to talk to him. And my mother would give her a ride. Told my mother, and I'm not going to use the vocabulary she used, that I was talking to this person. And, I let society stop me at that time from talking and being friends with someone because they were of another color. And I vowed after that never to let that happen again. My mother told me, I know my father would have killed me. Well, he wouldn't have killed me. He would have thrown me out of the house. There was no way I could have interracial dated at that time.
Yes.
And years later, my son must have been 6 or 7. I went to a Burger King, and this guy came over to me, and he said, I remember you. Did you work at such and such a place? And I said, yes. And he goes, well, you don't look any different. And I looked and I went, Ted? And because he was bald, back then he had a fro. He was bald. And he said, you don't look any different. I said, well, thank you. I consider that a compliment. But it was amazing that he remembered me. And, there's people shouldn't dictate to people who they could love and who they can't love. I did not raise my son that way. And you mentioned Aretha Franklin. That was my son's first cassette tape. He wanted Aretha Franklin.
I love him already. Jeez.
He was my son is he's a sweetheart, and I never told him who he could be friends with, who he could love. And he liked this little girl in preschool, Synovia, and she was African American, and he told me he was going to marry Synovia. And he told my dad, and my dad right away is like, well, what color is she? And Josh got really upset because my father said, well, I won't go to your wedding then. And Josh was actually very upset about that. And I said, Josh, don't worry, because by the time Grandpa by the time you get married, Grandpa will be in the nursing home, won't even know. And I was right. I mean, Josh isn't married, but he was in a home. But we can't dictate to people.
No, we can't.
Society, who they could love, where they should live. And I'm glad that interracial dating and marriage is much more acceptable now than it was back in the 70s. But I had to share that story because it broke my heart that I could not talk to this person.
Yes.
It's not right.
Yeah, well,
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
go ahead.
I was just saying.
No, go ahead.
I was in Cutcher's. I existed in that vacuum at Cutcher's Country Club. I was on a board circuit. I lived, as I said in the book, I lived in that area, so I got a clear understanding, always by definition, of how people felt. So my life was spent. My growing up life was spent always learning how people felt, what they were willing to do, what they were willing to say. And the conclusion to that was, we are all born free and equal. Can we ever get there?
Amen.
And I listened to Van Jones the other night, and he said, when do we become buddy-buddy? We've had all of the internal fighting. We've had all of the bickering. We've had the injustice. The movie always ends on a high note. When do we get to the high note where we want this movie to end well? And that's what I think, and that's what I believe is the opportunity we're being given as a nation. And I don't want to wax political, but I do want to say that we as a people of a nation that we're blessed to have and have so many groups in, we have a golden opportunity on this planet to show people and exhibit to people how to live together, how to come together to support each other, and we seem to fight that. We seem to want to fight that, but I'm going to believe that eventually that's going to happen. And you had said earlier about we had the permission to have our relationships. And really, I'll tell you how I felt when I met Jennifer. I didn't give a damn. Jennifer was everything to me because she's somebody that liked me, and I liked her, and I was looking for somebody. I know people fall in love. I had understood by the age of 40 how love worked. But I just wanted somebody to just like me, like you liked the young man sitting at the table that you were talking to, and you exchanged for me. We just like people. And from there, things grow. But when we're disallowed to even like someone, then you're not allowing me to live my complete life. And I will not have that, and I will not support that.
Yes, I agree. I even said to my husband died almost 3 years ago. I'll be 3 years in January. Thank you. And I said to my son, I said, you know what? If I ever meet anyone, I said, no one's going to tell me who I could love this time. No one's going to tell me who I could date and who I can. And I told Josh, so listen, if I meet an African-American guy that I like,
yes, I
will date him.
Yes.
Whatever the person is. This is not in the 70s anymore. And growing up with that mentality. But it's ironic, Ray, because my sister married a Filipino who looks like he's African-American. He's dark. My father welcomed him. You know what? She was 40 when she got married. They were so happy she got married. I didn't think they cared at that point.
That's a funny story. That's funny.
I don't think they cared.
Did you ever see the movie with Peter O'Toole where they had that Philippine? It was a Filipino marriage, and there's a great singer. Was it Morgana King or Abby? One of the great singers, and she married a Filipino in this movie, and it was based on just what you just said. It was a Jewish family that took him in. And they took him in and they loved him because he was a great cook.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, Ray, you are you are a treasure. You are one of America's treasures as far as I'm concerned. And I want to thank you so much for coming on my show. I'm deeply honored to be talking to you. I really am. And my son is impressed.
Oh, good.
And I just want to remind the audience, folks, I couldn't even get into the depth that this book is. You have to order it. You have to read it. It is phenomenal. It is history, and it's history that needs to be told so we don't forget what happened. And the name of the book is The NBA in Black and White, the memoir of a trailblazing NBA player and coach, Ray Scott with CHARLEY ROSEN, introduction by EARL, the Pearl Monroe. I promise you will not be disappointed in reading this book. And if you know a sports fanatic, what a great gift. Holidays are coming up, folks. Give this to a sports fanatic in your family. They will absolutely love this book. And thank you for writing your book, Ray. And Ray Scott is on Facebook. That's how you could get in touch with him. Is that an author's page, Ray, or is it just Ray Scott?
Ray Scott. No, just Ray Scott.
You might have to look you up.
Yes, please. I would love for you to friend me, please. And are you on Facebook, or is your son on Facebook? Well, then
we both are.
Yeah, then friend me, please. Please.
Yes. Oh, definitely. We both are, because I post my shows on my own personal page, but also all over in different groups. So I definitely will. I want to thank you again, Ray Scott, for coming on, writing your book, teaching us about history, telling about your experience. It's a wonderful book. And thank you, the listeners, for listening. I encourage you to buy this book. You will not be sorry. And tell your friends about Chatting with Betsy. And I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to Chatting with Betsy. It's for free on Spreaker. And you can listen to my show on PassionateWorldTalkRadio.com. And when you share this show, you're helping other people. Chatting with Betsy is all about helping other people with resources, telling stories to help others going through a similar situation. And I just want to thank everyone for their support. Please read the blog, which will have information that Jeannie White, who is a station manager, writes, and she produces the show. So thank you, Jeannie White, and thank you to Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio, for making this all possible. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you can be anything, so please be kind, shine your light bright, because we need it. You know what, folks? If you cut yourself, what color of blood do you bleed? You bleed red. Everyone bleeds red blood. We all are so much more alike than we are different. Let's start loving each other and improve on yourself so that you'll be a better human being. And then what a great world this would be if everybody would work on themselves and to have love and peace. And yes, I guess you could say I am a child of the 60s and 70s. I still believe that. So thank you, everyone, for listening. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye.